Hi guys, how's it going? My name is Julian. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This video is part of a series of videos about my life experiences and situations that have provided valuable lessons for me both as an artist and as a person. In this video, I'm going to talk about how did it felt to be a musician in Italy, particularly in Genoa in the late 90s. Now, 98 and 99 were indeed very interesting times in general because we were right in between the old millennium and the new millennium. Now, it was the end of the 90s, and the 90s, just like the 80s, 70s, and 60s, were very distinctive decades. They had their own distinctive fashion, music styles, sounds, colors. And we were heading into the information age. It was the beginning, maybe just the tip of the iceberg of what will later on we will witness, which is the birth of social media, streaming platforms, in general, the internet take over in Italy in the late 90s, especially in Genoa, which is a city on the northwest of Italy, not too far from the border with France. The music scene was a very small scene. It was a niche, basically. You had this very tight group of singer-songwriters that they were coming from the old tradition of Italian pop music with influences sometimes from folk. I remember playing with musicians that they were part of the Franco Fossati band. I met and played with musicians that worked with Cristiano De André, the son of the late De André, Fabrizio De André, legendary Genovese, a singer-songwriter with an incredible album which I still love, Cresa de Ma. If you never heard of the album, please check the video description below. I put a link to the YouTube playlist of that album. And I had the luck of meeting incredible musicians like Armando Corsi, which unfortunately passed away a few months ago. It was anyway like about a year ago. And also, they had the opportunity of being part of the metal scene in Liguria, which was very strange because the majority of hard rock and metal musicians that they were part of the scene of Genoa, they used to go to Milan because at the time Milan was the place where you were going to make it, and nowadays it's mostly a business city. Genova was a little bit cut out from the rest of Italy, mostly because of the geographical position. It was kind of isolated from the inside of Italy, and it was not too close to Tuscany and Florence. So it was one of those places where the music scene was definitely disjointed. It wasn't cohesive. You wouldn't felt being part of a consistent group of people. You would mostly interact with like 8, 10 musicians, and some of them will have a band, and other ones they will try, to interact as session players. And you would often find bands that they were literally like one block away from where you live, and you didn't even know they existed. Also, in the late 90s, it was very big to make demos on tapes. Tapes were huge, and CDs were, already kicking in. But if you had a 4 tracks or an 8 tracks tape recorder, you could literally go into a rehearsal room and cut your record. And this used to be particularly useful for bands looking for gigs because there was no way of knowing how a band will sound, especially if you were from Genoa and you were trying to get a gig like in Tuscany or Lombardy, Milan. The only way would be to send a CD, send a tape, and going to a studio was quite expensive. Like hiring a recording studio and going there, considering that most of the studios were using digital software like Cubase or the early Pro Tools, but still there were quite few studios that they were cutting on tape, on reel. It was expensive. It was quite expensive to do an album by yourself. And there were no record labels in the whole region, in the whole area, where they were up to giving you money to record your album. There was a very small metal label that was actually a music shop in the center of Genoa City, and they did produce some interesting albums. But the production was, I mean, like if I listen to the records nowadays, it was so bad. It was the equivalent of a demo, you know. But at the time, it was already seen as a miracle, you know, just to have something and say like, hey, this is how my band sounds, or these are our songs. We wrote the songs. So when I got my first big payment from session work, which was to make music and perform live for a fashion showcase in Rapallo, which later on developed into another show in Portofino. It was 2 hours of music, and I had to make the music. I had to go to a studio, and I remember there was no laptops at the time, at least to make music. So you had to rent a computer for the mixing, and then get all the recording done on tape, and then move it from tape to digital. So it was quite elaborate. But I got this fund from the region, and also from the organizers of the fashion show. And with that payment, I made my first EP, which it was a very long EP because it was 14 tracks. It was like 65 minutes of instrumental music, and it was meant to be a showcase of the different genres that I was into, but also at the same time something not too crazy and experimental, because it was meant to be a tape to give me gigs as a session player. So not to play live, but to show this is me playing guitar, playing bass, and this is how I arrange guitars. This is how I make an instrumental track. So there was instrumental pop. So there were songs with no lyrics and no vocals. There were songs that they were more rock or even metal, or even ambient music. The incredible thing is that when I did my first album, which it was called Versus Fate, so basically against the odds, it was my little, step towards independence from Italy, like leaving Italy and starting to, which that's what actually happened, thanks to that little album where I literally invested all the money that I had at the time, into this, EP, where I literally manufactured the cover artworks by hand. It was handmade basically, and I shipped around the world. I sent it to Ronald Beanstalk, amazing entertainment lawyer. At the time, he had this talent development department in his office somewhere like uptown Manhattan, and I got a gig in Finland because my very first international gig actually, which was in Helsinki, in Finland, with Steven Stewart. Thanks to that CD, that album, and the last track of that album called Silence Memories, or Silences Memories, or something like that. It was like 8 minutes of this ambient piece with me playing melodic guitar solos. Ended up being the news opener, the radio news opener in Austria on O3 hit radio station for I don't know how long, but that was my check right there in 2006 that allowed me to go back traveling around the world, and visiting New York and visiting other places. So something that I recorded in 98 came back to me in 2006 as very good news. What I've learned from living in Italy in the late 90s as independent musician, independent artist, is pretty much the same lesson that I've learned or that I was reminded by living in Copenhagen in 2003, which is music is made, is uh, kept alive by real people. It is about humans making art for other humans. It is ultimately the way to express or feel alive, the way to express who we are, the way to feel alive as humans. Is one of the most beautiful languages, if not the most beautiful language in the universe, for humans at least. But definitely living in a really alive underground scene in Italy taught me that I had to get out of my room and go talk to people, interact with people, build meaningful connections with people. Otherwise, nobody would have ever heard of me. There's no way. If I was just studying music and going to the conservatory and playing classical guitar at recitals in some random church, which is what I was doing, I would have never made it outside Italy, literally. Obviously, recording that CD helped me enormously. It was a life changing experience, a choice that literally it was not just an eye opener, but it literally allowed me to get access to a completely different timeline in my life that allowed me ultimately to be part of incredible projects and travel extensively throughout three continents in one of the most exciting times in probably human history, which is the passing from the old millennium to the new millennium. So just by doing a short decision, that short decision had very long-term consequences. And in this case, luckily, there were good long-term consequences. It's something that allowed me, both as a musician and as an artist, to understand the importance of getting away from the technicality of things and focus on the feelings and the human to human interaction. And I know that nowadays this sounds extremely relevant because we are in the age of artificial intelligence, we are in the age of technology, and we feel we can do anything. We have so many different superpowers, which is true. But at the same time, I think it's very important to remember the value of art and music, which is to make us feel human, even if this means to be vulnerable, to make mistakes. Um, and all this stuff was just natural during the late 90s in Italy. There was no theory, it was just something happening on a regular basis. It was something that it was, in the air. You wouldn't have to think, oh, I need to go to that place because I need to put together a band. I need to go to that place because if I don't go to that place, I'm not gonna get gigs as a session player. It wasn't working like that. It was just like, okay, today I'm going to be, active because I have a gig tonight, but I'm gonna be around the whole day. And obviously, there was nothing else that you could do because there was no social media, there was no WhatsApp, there was no smartphones. So you had to go outside and talk and know people and being in the known, even if this means to travel internationally. But it was such a good school of life. And sometimes I miss those times because everybody was on the same frequency. And nowadays you have so many different realities coexisting. But if you talk with somebody that started doing music in the 90s, they'll tell you pretty much the same. And it is the incredible learning that you had to go through in order to call yourself a professional musician. Now, if you want to hear more about my stories, about my times in Tokyo or US, London, so many different places, and what I've learned from those times, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And obviously, you're going